Hey guys, I'm Shauna with Homegrown Self-Reliance. So today we're going to be talking about trellises. Why would you want to trellis your vegetables? Well, there's a few good reasons. The first one is a lot of plants take up a lot of ground space in your garden. So in fact, some squash and pumpkins can take up to about 6 feet of their own space. So if you're able to grow them vertically, it saves space in the garden so you can grow more food. Second good reason is it gets the plants off of the ground where they can be susceptible to disease. It also improves airflow for your plants, and it also makes picking your vegetables easier. If they're more hip height or so, you don't have to bend over and pick them up off the ground. So this is what I use for my tomatoes. Absolutely cannot use the little store-bought cages. They're just way too small and they don't work. So indeterminate tomatoes especially can get really big. They can get up to 6 to 8 feet tall throughout the growing season. So with this, what we've done is we just have a T-post here, and every 10 feet or so all the way down my row, got a nice long row here. This is all going to be tomatoes. So I've personally got 4 strings here, and what I'll do is I'll plant the tomatoes at the base of it, and then as they grow up I'll kind of weave them in and out of these wires. I hope you can see these okay on the video. I will probably need to tie them off in certain spots, tie them loosely with some plant ties or some pantyhose. Just kind of tie them loosely so that it doesn't cut off the circulation basically to the rest of that branch. This way they can get at least 4 foot high without much extra support. So over here, take a little walk over here. So I kind of did this backwards. It's best to actually put your trellises in first and then plant your plants. I prematurely planted my peas, so I just had to be really careful when I pushed these into the ground. So honestly, I've just been using stuff that I have around the house. This is some poultry netting that I bought to put on the top of my chicken coop to protect them from predators. And I just had this metal, it's a post to hold a shelf. So I just pounded this into the ground, strung my netting. It's actually doubled up here, and I have this baling twine up at the top to give it some extra support. We use baling twine for a lot of things around here. So I've got the pea plants growing right along the bottom here. So as they start growing more, they'll be able to grow up this mesh. Pea plants typically don't get too heavy, so this one didn't need a lot of support. So I'm just using the mesh netting here, and it's going to work just fine. Peas grow up with little tendrils, I like to call them little curlicues, that kind of attach to everything that they're next to. So with peas, it's a little better to have both vertical supports and horizontal supports. So this mesh netting is going to work perfect. One thing that I might do differently if I wanted to spend a little bit of money on it, which for this project I was just trying to use stuff that I have around the house. So
Self-reliant.
yes, self-reliance. So if I actually wanted to spend a little bit of money, I would actually invest in some biodegradable netting. That way at the end of the season, when the peas are all done, you can just rip off the netting, throw it all in your compost pile. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to try to take off the netting, and it's might be a little bit of a mess. So that would be one thing I would change. And then here, sorry, it's still not past our last frost for the season, so I haven't really planted much of anything except for the peas. So this is going to be my cucumber trellis. This is welded wire mesh, and of course our T-posts here. We just fastened it with some fence some fence fasteners. So I'm going to plant the cucumbers down here at the base. The cucumbers will sprawl up this wire mesh. And here's kind of the neat thing about cucumbers. I've grown them on the ground before, but they end up not being very uniform. There's sometimes a little bit of fungal disease that grows on them. So this is a much better way. Excuse me. So with this, it actually gets it up off the ground and allows more airflow. And then also, on the north side of my trellis, I can actually plant plants that enjoy cooler weather. They can actually get a little bit of shade in here, and since it's basically a lean-to shape, I can reach in here and gather any kind of plants that I've got growing under here. And then, as the cucumbers sprawl up this trellis, the fruit will actually hang down through these holes, and it'll make it so easy to harvest them. You can just come along here and just grab them as they're sticking through. I've made it fairly sturdy. Cucumber plants can get a little heavier, so you want something sturdy. The wire or the mesh netting wouldn't work for cucumbers. So you definitely want something more sturdy. So these ones aren't very pretty, but they're definitely functional. But I'm just wanting to show you some of the ways that you can use stuff that you might have laying around the house to trellis your vegetables. Let's take a walk over here. I'll show you an actual cute one that I made. I've always loved the teepees where people plant peas or beans that grow up it. So I made one. I didn't have bamboo poles, but we had these tall, sturdy weeds that grew on the outside of the garden last year. And they dried, and they're actually pretty sturdy. So what I did is I put in 5 of them, dug them into the ground a little bit, and packed down the soil around them really good. And then I put this paracord wrapped around it. There, in a few spots I actually put zip ties to help hold it in place. And then up at the top, again, we used our baling twine and more paracord to just bind the top, make sure that it's nice and sturdy. So I'm going to use this for my pole beans. I left it open in this spot right here. I have grandkids, so I wanted them to be able to go in there and play, have a little tea party or whatever in there while I'm weeding the garden. So, like I said, so I left this spot open. Normally I would have just gone all the way around, but I wanted them to have a place to go in and have a little bit of fun. One thing I did want to mention, going back to the tomato trellises, make sure you don't use barbed wire. We just used electrical wire that we had for a hot wire fence. You definitely don't want to have anything that's going to be too sharp or pokey, that's going to cut you while you're harvesting your tomatoes or pruning them. Tomatoes are not natural climbers. They do sprawl out a lot if allowed to. So if you do the trellis like what I showed you, you can just weave the plant up and through the wires and tie them up so that they actually stay in place. Cucumbers, beans, and some squashes grow up supports by having little tendrils or curlicues. So they wrap around pretty much anything that they're growing next to. The only thing with squash and some melons is that they will need very solid supports. You definitely need something like my cucumber trellis or something even stronger for squash and melons. You also are not going to be able to grow big old pumpkins on a trellis. You need to just leave those on the ground. With little melons and some of your winter squash and summer squash, you can grow those on trellises. You just might need to do a little sling for the fruit as it's growing. So a lot of people use pantyhose or like a little piece of cotton t-shirt that you attach to the trellis itself to help hold those fruits so that they don't fall off before they're ready. Another thing to keep in mind is that tomatoes aren't natural climbers. They will vine up whatever you want them to, but you will have to support them and tie them off a little bit. So another thing I wanted to show you guys. This right here is where I'm going to be planting my sweet potatoes. I have sweet potato slips growing inside the house. They'll be ready to come out within maybe 2 weeks. Our last frost date is still about 2 weeks away, so we've got a little ways to go. But sweet potato vines like to grow up stuff too. So what I did, I have this vinyl lattice, and of course I had to buy it, but it also matches the stuff we have around the house. So we had a smaller piece laying around, so I put it here so that the sweet potato vines can grow up it. And I'll also probably spill over the side of my pot here, which is exactly what I want. Gives it a nice little focal point right here. So I hope you guys can use some of these tips on using stuff that you have laying around to make yourself some inexpensive trellises for your garden. If you have any questions, let me know. I appreciate your support.